One fruit snack for each.
Yes, I know. Thank you. All right, are we all seated and ready to, do you want a moment? Very well. I'd like to call this meeting of the Clay County Commission to order. We will begin with our invocation. Mr. Administrator, when you are prepared, please proceed.
Pray with me. Father, as we continue to observe the recent 80th anniversary of the bombing of Pearl Harbor, we are reminded once again of the greatest generation and the amazing and abundant sacrifices that generation made so that we have the freedom to be here today doing what we do. We ask you for your blessing on those folks that survived that generation, smaller each and every day, and to recognize that amazing sacrifice that that generation provided to each and every one of us. Father, be with us as we meet. Give us discernment, give us patience, tolerance, and above all, gratitude for the opportunity to gather like we do today. We ask this in Jesus' blessed name. Amen.
Amen. Please stand for the pledge. Thank you. Please call the roll. Here.
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 Is there a motion for the approval of today's agenda?
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda as printed.
Motion has been made for the approval of our agenda this afternoon. Are there any comments or concerns? Any changes being proposed? Very well. If there is no further discussion, Commissioner Thompson, you are recognized to close.
I close.
Please call the roll.
Commissioner Thompson?
Yes.
Commissioner Carpenter?
Yes.
That brings us to a meeting's schedule. Mr. Administrator?
Commissioners, the next scheduled meeting of the commission will be a business session that will take place next Wednesday, December the 15th, beginning at 6 p.m.
And Mr. Administrator, if I am correct, that will be our last meeting for this calendar year as we are approaching the holiday season.
That will be the final meeting of calendar year 2021. We will gather again after that meeting on January the 5th at 2 p.m.
Thank you very much. There are no honorary resolutions on today's agenda. There are no items under discussion. There are no public hearings scheduled for this afternoon. There is nothing on our consent agenda. That brings us to our regular agenda. Our first item is 2021-333. Mr. Administrator.
Commissioners, 2021-333 is a request to approve a sole source vendor agreement with SimPro. This is a treasury management software. The request comes from the Treasurer's Office. It is a renewal of a maintenance fee that is paid annually. This is simply a repeat of an annual event. It does involve an expense, and it does come from the Treasurer's Office.
Thank you. And this appears to be in the amount that is historically consistent with what has been spent in the past?
It absolutely is, yes.
Are there any questions or comments from the Commission? Since this involves expenditure of money, I think that this would probably go on to the regular agenda. Is that the consensus?
That's fine.
Very well. 2021-333 will be on next meeting's regular agenda. That brings us to 2021-282. Mr. Administrator.
Commissioners, 2021-282 is a resolution that has already been presented to the Commission in the past. It is a request to approve an American Rescue Plan Act funding request from the Clay County Public Health Center. It originally came to the Commission through the Auditor. It does involve some expense. I believe it was Commissioner Carpenter that asked for this to be one-tabled, and now I think he's also the reason that it has been resubmitted. And that's the essence of that request.
Very well. With that, is there anybody here from the health centers? I see no one right off. Commissioner Carpenter, would you like to go ahead and maybe lead the discussion?
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate it, Commissioner. So, we did talk about this a couple months ago. At the time, obviously, we had a discussion, expressed some concerns around the type of work going into getting the vaccination rate in Clay County higher. We continue to lag pretty dramatically behind the nationwide average in each age group, as well as first dose, second dose, and boosters. So, I continue to have those concerns. I think a lot more work needs to be done. What I would propose doing today in order to make sure they can continue operations is approve partial funding from, they initially requested money over the course of several years. I'm not especially inclined to approve that funding for that duration of time, but the first two durations for 2021 would total $655,015. And so my proposal would be to go ahead and approve that first sum of funds to the health department and continue the discussion around what more we can do to get the vaccination rate up. And I have a little more to say about all of that. I don't know if now would be the time that you'd like me to do that.
Let's go ahead and deal with the first,
amendment, sure.
your first point. I would ask Mr. Counselor, would this require an amendment on the part of Commissioner Carpenter to go ahead and reduce the amount to the sum he had just recited? And would it further, assuming that his next point that he makes would be a separate point, to go ahead and move that on as an agenda and then address Commissioner Carpenter's second point?
If the amendment is accepted and approved, I guess either way.
Either way would do. I'll ask Commissioner Carpenter, would you prefer two amendments or one? I don't know how interrelated your 2 points are.
So I think I'll only need one amendment. And the amendment would be to reduce the approval of Arpa funds to $655,015 from the $4.5 million initially requested.
And would you like to make that?
I would like to
motion?
make that amendment now. Yep.
Very well. Motion has been made to amend, there we are, 2021-282 to allow for the amount to be adjusted to the first year's, to the two columns expenditures that Commissioner Carpenter had indicated. The total is $655,015.05. Gotcha.
If I can maybe suggest that the way to do it on the actual resolution, the opening sentence, which ends with Clay County Public Health Center, if you just insert the words "in the amount of $655,000, $655,015.05, period." I think I'll take care of it. So there's a specific amount attached to it.
I think,
Is
thank
that
you.
acceptable?
Yes, that makes sense to me.
Very well. That is then the amendment that is put before us at this moment. Discussion on the amendment. Commissioner Carpenter, would you like to add anything to that as we start that discussion?
Just that I think, again, I think it's important to get them funds for the work that they are doing on an ongoing basis, and I certainly wouldn't ever assert that they're not doing work to get people vaccinated. My concern has been and continues to be that not enough is being done, and we have received a number of correspondences from the health department since that initial meeting, attempting to further explain the work that they are doing and plan to do into the future, and I think that's a good thing. I think approving only this first, the purpose for the amendment of approving only this first sum of money is to make sure that we continue to be able to have a dialogue with them as we go into future months in which we haven't already committed years worth of funding, but rather that conversation I think will flourish better if we continue to play a role in the funding going forward. So that's the purpose of the amendment.
Commissioner Thompson, would you like to join the discussion?
I will, thank you. No, I feel very comfortable with this amendment and look forward to giving them some additional funding to carry out some of the things they need to take care of this year, so.
Very good. I also support the idea, because as we go further out into the situation, the much overused but still appropriate expression that this is uncharted water is certainly applicable, and to think that we can, with any credibility be able to focus on what the expenses are going to be in 2024 is probably not overly realistic. I noticed that these are expenses that would cover the period of essentially the calendar year of 2021. Is that correct?
That is correct. These funds are going to ultimately be somewhat discretionary with the health department. And so how they decide to categorize whether or not reimbursing funds that they've already incurred versus how much they want to put toward future costs, there will be some discretion up to them. Obviously, any expenditures have to be Arpa compliant, which I would anticipate they will be able to make a pretty strong case that any of these expenditures are Arpa compliant as the health department. But yeah, I do want to say, I don't intend these funds to, my hope is that they wouldn't be immediately depleted. My hope would be that they can give us at least a couple-month window here to continue dialogue with them about going into 2022, what more can be done to increase what is, again, our dramatically too low vaccination rate here in Hvac County.
Okay. I have a question on process on this, and maybe the administrator would be the person to ask, if not perhaps the auditor. And I want to make the point as we go forward on this and any ARPA spending, and that is that the county has, through the administrator's office and through the auditor's office, done a great job of qualifying these expenses to make sure that they are indeed compliant and that they are realistic in their requests. So I certainly want to express my gratitude for both of those departments for doing such a great job on making sure that we are spending these monies in a way that is consistent and also is responsible as far as our duties to the taxpayers. One of the questions that I have is, there are essentially two ways for these monies to be distributed, and I'm not entirely sure which one we're doing on this. One would be that we would then, in essence, cut a check for 655 plus, and that it would, the obligation is that we expend it within those categories, which I have a pretty high level of confidence that would indeed be the case. The other possible method would be that this would be a pot of money that would reside with the county, and then we would be reimbursing them as they met these expenses. And one of the reasons that seems relevant is, since we're talking about the calendar year of 2021, which we have nearly come to the end of, it wouldn't be too difficult. In fact, my suspicion is that they would have these numbers. They came to these numbers by, in fact, taking existing expenses and compiling them. So my question is, are we going to be doing this? Which method would we be employing to go forward on this?
Well, just offhand, I would say that the Public Health Center would probably have a little bit to say about that based on whether or not they have invoices and expenses totaling that, or whether they have anticipated expenses that comes to that sort of amount as well. But I also noticed that the auditor has snuck up behind me, and I think he might have some additional comment on that very same subject. So I'm going to turn the microphone over to him.
Well, I would say that the auditor does not sneak up, that the auditor, in fact, moves in a deliberate but subtle fashion. Mr. Auditor.
Thank you. Victor Hurlbert, Clay County Auditor. Yeah, to that question, I'd agree with the administrator. Their initial request, as we know, indicated this was the amount they thought they would spend in 2021. So I see, one of two approaches. So initially the request was, and the way it was presented was that Health Center would present us with invoices quarterly. We would never pre-fund, and after those were audited, we would then reimburse them, so to speak. And so that was the way it was presented. Now, I know the Commissioner Carpenter, brought up the idea of giving them a little more discretion, and obviously making sure it's within the guidelines constraints. So I think the one of two ways to go are, we can take the initial amount for 2021. Health Center, working through the administrator, they can submit those invoices. They'll be audited to make sure they're compliant, and then we'll submit the total payment of up to $655,015.05. Or you can do this forward looking up to that amount, and they can submit future 2022 costs to be reimbursed. So either way, I think originally it was intended for 21 expenditures, but I mean, we're open to either way. We'll do what commission directs, so.
One of the things that occurs to me, and obviously this is Commissioner Carpenter's item, so I don't want to overstep, but it seems to me, just looking at it from my own perspective, that we will no doubt be getting copies of their expenses that would support their 2021 request. It occurs to me not a bad thing to maybe go ahead and release the initial amount with the understanding that future amounts would in fact be reimbursements. The reason I say that is we're talking about invoices that might stretch all the way back to nearly a year ago in January of this year. So I can see where that would be a cash flow issue, but I very much like the idea that these be reimbursed when practical. I could go either way on that. Like I say, the main reason I could see going the other route with the 2021 expenses is just because we are so deeply into the year. But that's just an observation I have. I'd like to hear what the other commissioners and what you fellas think as far as the best way to go. The other concern I have is that I am aware that if we have that it could put an extra load of compliance onto the auditor's office, which I want to make sure that we don't add more work to the auditor's office without, at a minimum, the input of the auditor, and certainly after some considered discussion to make sure that you have the proper resources to do the job. So that's kind of why I'm bringing that up, is I want to make sure also that you know, as we task you with doing some of this stuff, you feel A, comfortable to be able to do it, and B, that you feel you have the resources, and if you don't, then we need to have that discussion. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, to that point, yeah, I think we'd be fine. I think we've been operating on that basis from the CARES Act through the new rescue plan, so we're able to take that on. I think one thing that we'll definitely want to be looking at for 2021 expenditures is any potential overlap. They've indicated there is no overlap, but they've received CARES Act funding, they've received other federal government funding, they received Operation Safe funding, so we just want to be absolutely sure that there's no duplication. So
That's true. There is the idea of that we don't want to, we don't want to inadvertently have a double dipping situation, which could happen when you have all this money flowing back and forth completely innocently. Commissioner Carpenter, did you have any thoughts you'd like to share?
Well, just in terms of the way we do the money distribution, as originally envisioned, which I think we can maintain, is just, we'll do this as an encumbrance, we'll put the money aside, they can submit their costs for reimbursement and then reimburse, just instead of putting $4.5 million into the encumbrance to cover a multi-year period, we'll just do this initial amount. And of course, my expectation is that we'll add more to that at a later point. Again, the point of doing part of it now rather than all of it is to foster ongoing communication, and I think it will make that kind of communication and our ability to weigh in on things that we see as necessary more likely to happen.
I think that's a good observation. Commissioner Thompson.
Thank you. No, I agree with my fellow commissioners. I think the way that to go forward with this is for more of a reimbursement cost as of right now. I feel very comfortable with that. I do have one quick question. I see he's running away again.
No, he was in a very stealthy and deliberate manner
like, "Oh, no."
withdrawing.
I know. Sorry, Victor. I was going to ask you, I know we got our first round of the Arpa money. Do you know when the second round actually comes through to us?
So the way the guidance was written, we received the first tranche essentially in May this year, and they said a year later. So that would be the expected timeline. So I don't know exactly for sure, but as soon as we get communication from U.S. Treasury, we can pass that along. So yeah.
Okay, wonderful. No, I just wanted to see, does it show up in the beginning of the year? Are we getting it in May? Because we just want to make sure that everybody who's requesting the money, we're divvying it out, fairly and amongst everybody, and then we don't run out of funds, so.
I think you're absolutely right, Commissioner. While it is a substantial amount of money, it is a finite amount of money.
That's all I have on this, but I'm also open to other suggestions if anybody has any and how they prefer to move forward with the money, but.
Is there anything, Counselor, that you think we need to add as far as the method of distribution that, and I agree with Commissioner Carpenter's approach. I think that that makes sense. Is that just something that is really internal and doesn't need to be in this resolution?
Staff, I think, on how to administer it. Yeah.
Okay. In that case, I would just ask, Mr. Administrator, given the preference expressed by Commissioner Carpenter, and it seems to be, I think, the consensus of the three of us, do you feel comfortable with the level of instruction as far as how we would distribute it? Do you feel comfortable with that?
I do. We have, I think, abundant checks and balances, and we've got a very good process in place that begins in the auditor's office, of course, including with the treasurer. So I believe the process is very well defined, and I certainly think that the Public Health Center would have some comment on this, and between them and the auditor and treasurer's office, I think they can probably put together a process that meets everybody's needs.
Very good. And thank you for including the treasurer. I neglected to include that office in this process.
He's the guy that's got the bags.
Important gentleman. With that, is there any comment from the public on this amendment? Seeing none. Commissioner Carpenter, I will look to you to go ahead and close. And in case it may seem confusing to those watching, today what we are doing is putting items on regular or consent agenda for our next meeting. However, since this is an amendment to one of these items, there will be a vote related to that, and then we will make the decision on whether we put it on regular or consent agenda. So with that, Commissioner Carpenter, would you like to close?
I close.
Please call the roll.
Commissioner Carpenter?
Yes.
Commissioner Thompson?
Yes.
Very good. That brings us back to 2021-282 as amended. Is there any, are there any further comments or discussion on 282?
Commissioner, I'll just add, in terms of this issue, you know, as I think we all would agree, it's an ongoing challenge. We've talked about funding the health department and getting vaccination rates higher. Our work isn't done just with these Arpa funds. One thing I can tell you from the chief medical officer at Liberty Hospital is a month ago they had 6 inpatient COVID patients. 2 weeks ago they had 20. As of yesterday, they have 46. So that's almost 8 times, 800% almost increase in the last month. Also been in discussions with the CEO of Liberty Hospital. He is going to send us information, trying to work with entities to supplement whatever work that the health department is doing. And so I know Liberty Hospital is coming up with a promotional plan that they're going to do to try to encourage people here in Clay County to get vaccinated, advertising, billboards, that sort of thing. They're also going to be working with Hvac to put on more Hvac clinics, as well as work on distribution of the new antiviral medication, the pills. And so I think at some point we may be in a position to potentially help fund some of those efforts that, you know, that's not the Clay County Health Department, but it's, you know, a good health provider here in Clay County that wants to do work to get the vaccination rates. And of course, they see firsthand, like I said, just over the last month, going from 6 to 46 inpatient, they see the potential they understand the importance of doing better in terms of our vaccination rates here in Clay County, and I think they want to help, and I would be supportive of us doing so when the time comes.
With that, obviously we don't go to a vote this time, but since it is an item that you've taken the lead on, would your preference be regular or consent for this item?
Better do regular agenda for this.
The proposal is to put 2021-282 on regular. Commissioner Thompson? You okay with it?
I'm fine with that.
Very well. 2021-282 will appear on next, as amended, will appear on next week's.
Commissioner, may I add something on that?
Please, go ahead.
Just on the process side of it, you know, this was a resolution that was put in front of you 4 to 6 weeks ago. It's being amended today, assuming there's a resolution of it next week and passed, that will fully resolve this request.
So next week it will be 282, period, not as amended.
And it will be done. So there's nothing else to bring back for future years. It will be incumbent upon the health center to make a new request. So
Oh, I see what you're, yes, of course, yeah, because we are eliminating.
you're fully resolving this request once you deal with it next week.
Right, so when we get our documentation on 282 next week, it will not have the out years on it. It will just be for this specific request that we are fulfilling.
That's correct. And there isn't if in a month from now you want to bring up those remaining years, it'll be a new resolution. And to be honest, what I would expect is the health center needs to come back with a brand new request.
I think
for
that's,
anything else.
I think that's reasonable, and I tell you the truth, I think it's healthy because it leads to a constructive dialogue between our two bodies. Since the counselor was making an observation there that I think was a salient one, does anybody, before we go ahead and put this matter on the books, does anybody have any questions or comments from the points the counselor raised?
No, thanks.
Very well. With that, 2021-282, I guess as amended, will appear on next week's regular agenda. That brings us to 2021-323. Mr. Administrator.
Commissioners, 2021-323 is a request to approve an amended Memorandum of Understanding for the Emergency Rental Assistance Program 2.0. This is with the Kearney Enrichment Council and comes from the Auditor, who is at the podium for further comments.
Please proceed.
Yes, Commissioners. Victor Hurlbert, Clay County Auditor. Resolution 2021-323 is essentially to amend the existing Memorandum of Understanding with Kearney Enrichment Council. That was passed, Resolution 2021-221 on August 25th. If you recall, in ERAP 2.0, the guidance from the U.S. Treasury is that 85% of the funds in this second phase of the rental assistance program can be used for program funds, and then 15% can be used for administrative dollars. The original agreement was $35,000 for the three agencies that are distributing funds, and there was a request, instead of just one full-time position for that nonprofit, to work on the program for an additional part-time individual that they have seeking to bring on to assist with working on the program for them. And so that request is an additional $17,500, making their total amount $52,500. And I've indicated on Part 7 of the MOU that change to $52,500. There is enough out of that administrative bucket. We had $172,830 available, and after the original commitments, we still had $33,263.94 left to allocate. So there is still funding available for that. So that's essentially all Resolution 2021-323 is.
Okay. So this would involve the expenditure of some additional funding, of course. This would involve the additional funding of additional expenditures, of course.
It does, yes. So eventually, the way we have this set up, and it would occur in 2022 at this point, but the agencies bill us monthly with their actual time costs, and then those are paid. But it does basically obligate us to that, yes.
Okay. Are there any questions of the auditor from the commission?
No, thanks.
No, thank you.
Very well. With that, since this does obviously involve the expenditure of additional funding, 2021-323, I believe, should be on regular agenda for next week. Is that consistent? Yep. Very well. 2021-323 will be on next week's regular agenda. That brings us to 2021 Ordinance 48. Mr. Administrator.
Commissioners, 2021 Ordinance 48 is a request to approve updated annual fee schedules with long-term planning that goes from 2022 to 2026. That, again, is a submission from the auditor, and he remains at the podium for further comment.
Please proceed.
Victor Hurlbert, Clay County Auditor. Ordinance 2021, Ordinance 48 is an item that is really just good practice and good policy of the county to update the fees that are charged at all of our retail accounts receivable locations across the county. It has not consistently been done in the past every year, and so that's where I'm trying to make an effort to do so this year. In addition, a couple audits, well, a few audits of my office from the county auditor's office noted that we have at several locations prices being charged that weren't approved by the county commission. So what these fee schedules do will bring that to make that accurate, to essentially have what is actually being charged there in our fee schedule as approved by the commission. So that's one main reason to do that. It offers the various departments an opportunity to update their prices as they think is fit, and those who on the ground know how to plan for that. So I will briefly try and step through each one just so the commission is aware of any changes. The first one, the Midwest National Air Center, the airport. Really, the only changes here, you can see any difference on all of these from the proposed column in the next year compared to the current year in '21. That's your main indicator of any changes, of course. But the office feedback for this one was just to change the far right column of the 2026 proposed. So those were the only changes. But as you can see, fees are set to go up next year, as had already previously been approved. Other than that, we move on to the assessor's office. Before, you only had that first table, and we did not have the table below for GIS, or Geographic Information Systems, but those prices are actually being charged. So those were added in this fee schedule so that we have an accurate picture to our citizens and those making requests for products and services and maps of what those fees will be. We did also add one on the first table of a certified assessment role, so that is clear. We added some sunshine language at the bottom of their GIS list as well, because with the assessor attorney, they will get various sunshine requests. Moving on to the county clerk's office, only really a couple changes here. Initially, there was a table at the top that we removed because it was from the former administration. It had data research per hour of $200, which we thought posed some serious issues. So following the advice of the clerk, we removed that table. The clerk also requested bumping up the notary fee to $10 next year, according to the clerk, and she is here to make comment as well if needed, but neighboring counties smaller than Clay County charge higher than that, so we thought it was something that was reasonable to do. Other than that, the facilities management, we didn't make really any changes to this one at all. We changed some titles from Assistant County Administrator to Deputy County Administrator. Moving on to golf course, this was one with an audit finding where we noticed prices being charged that weren't in accordance with what was last approved by the commission. So we made those accurate to what is actually being charged there, as seen on their website and validated at the course.
Excuse me, when you say audit findings, you're talking about your office auditor? Because we've
Yes.
had a lot of things floating around, so I just want to make sure we're good.
There are a lot of audits. Yes, these are just internal audits by the county auditor office.
Great, thank you.
They did request, after some feedback, to increase their prices effective next year, as you can see, and then they are same over the next 5 years from there. So the reason being to drive up more revenues at the course and something they thought was competitive in the industry. After golf course, we have the highway, no real changes. They only added the 2026 column. So they remain on the same schedule as before. No changes in their prices next year. To historic sites, they did request some changes effective next year. They also added the Ferris Farm line for the grounds rental. And in the budget, as you'll note, we're doing some work there, putting in a restroom to make that more of an attraction. For marketing and tourism, there are no changes, just some titling as far as county administrator. For planning and zoning, we had some changes. We do have planning and zoning manager Jones here for any questions, but essentially changed the mailing costs a little bit, as you can note, increased effective next year. On the building fees and permits, one thing to note is previous administration improved road impact fee and a park impact fee on any build, essentially. And the split was $150 to the parks, $350 for a total of $500, $350 to highway. The request there from planning and zoning is to put all of that towards highway, $500, and you can see the logic and what is actually impacted by a new development clearly. So that's the request there. And then the commercial and industrial, we confirmed with planning and zoning there's low activity on that type of revenue, but it is essentially a cut in half on those fees effective next year. And then you can see the temporary certificate of occupancy went up slightly, but then the electronic plan submittal is going to phase out in '26. The re-inspections go up next year to $90. Those are really the only major changes there. In parks, I'll spend a little more time here, the only reason being we essentially removed some services that were available before. But if you look at camping fees, there used to be an electric 30 amp, so that's no longer offered. A winter discount of $10 for the water, that's no longer there. Organized youth group camping at Kelsey Short, it's now a maximum of 20 instead of minimum. The cabin and shelter fees, we reduced, or we did not reduce, we removed the Kelsey Short area shelter fee, as well as some other Crows Creek Pavilion without stalls, F Highway Trail shelter. On Sailboat Cove, we removed the includes aeration in their slip there. They made some changes on the all slips moorings and dry storage. This is still on marina fees. Nothing too prices, just some changes there as far as late fees. Removed late fees of 10% and a 20% fee if you're found without contract. So those are some things from previous that were changed here on advice of parks. Moving on to the marina fees, Camp Branch Marina and Paradise Point Marina. Changes there are no longer rent a 18-foot pontoon boat. There's still a 24-foot, and then also no longer rent the fishing boat and motor boat. Really, only other changes from there are the damage rental boat fees, increase the interior boat damage to $500 maximum, and then the maximums for the anchor and the cleaning fee to $40, from $30 to $40, and from $25 to $50. Those were changes. So that's parking. Want to spend a little time just so you're clear about the changes there. The other, anything else, they only put in the proposed 2026 column as far as price changes, and that's really was already on schedule. Okay, and then quickly we'll go to the last two, the Clay County Recorder of Deeds, no change at all. Those are mainly driven by statute anyway. And then the Sheriff's Office, we did add the concealed carry permit fees just because they had not been on fee schedules before. Those are driven by statute as well, so that's why they are the same throughout. We did update the housing of inmates costs, and the reason we did so is recommendations to regularly analyze how much that costs us to house those inmates, and so we worked with the Sheriff's Office to get what that actual cost would be, and so we stepped that up effective next year for our Clay County municipalities. We did an analysis of what the total detention costs are, roughly over $7 million, and so if you break that out by average number of inmates per day, you get to somewhere around ballpark $55 to $66 a day. So this gets us back up into scope. So that's the reason for the changes on that first line. That's really it. I apologize. That was quite a lot of information, but I just wanted the commission to have a clear picture on that.
Thank you very much. I'm glad you brought up GIS. That's an issue I think that we're going to be at some point addressing in a couple of different ways. So certainly it's something that I think we will be wanting to look at. I was also really happy to hear about the elimination of the $200 an hour fee for sunshine requests. I think it's certainly a relic from a time that we do not care to embrace. So citizens certainly have the right to request data at a reasonable fee, and that I think probably exceeded that without much doubt. As far as some of the building fees, and this might be more for Mr. Jones or somebody like that, but How are we in comparison to other areas in the county of like size? Are we in pretty good shape as far as our comparative? Because I would like to think that we are competitive on every place that is practical for us to be so.
That I'm going to have to defer to our P&Z manager.
Kip Jones, Planning and Zoning Manager. It's been a few years since I've looked at that. We were competitive at one point. As the auditor mentioned, I felt we were high as far as commercial and industrial permits go, so we cut those in half this year. But I'd be happy to do that research, but I think we're pretty competitive, probably in the middle of most jurisdictions.
I think the sense, I mean, it would be nice to know that at some point. I don't know that it's necessary to task you with doing the actual research on it. We can have that discussion later on, but I want to be comfortable with the idea that what we're looking at is going to put us in a competitive footing when it comes to other counties who are competing for businesses to construct buildings in the Northland or in the area here in general. So I just want to kind of verify, and also to tell you the truth, I just wanted to kind of send a message out a little bit that we are competitive when it comes to development, and we should always be in the mix when anybody's considering doing any kind of development in the area.
Well, and I will research that and pass that along to the commissioners, just what the research that I can complete, and pass those numbers along to you as well.
That is great. I appreciate that. I think that, I mean, there's some other observations, but I think those are the ones that sort of jumped out at me. Commissioner Thompson, do you have anything you'd like to ask or add?
No questions today, but I do want to thank the auditor for working on this, you and your team, and reaching out to all the departments. I know this is it's a big thing to work on, and I remember the days of filling out that and seeing that little box up there and filling in your numbers. So, no, I appreciate you putting this together and making some of these updates and changes that were desperately needed, so.
Commissioner Carpenter.
No questions other than I appreciate the work, and sounds like this is going to put us in better compliance with best auditing practices going forward, making sure the fees all match up, and so thank you for doing it.
Very good. Yes, thank you very much for the hard work. Since this does not involve expenditures, I think that we're probably appropriate to put this on consensus. Is that in agreement with everybody?
I mean, I'm comfortable with it. There are some changes in fees and stuff that impact Clay County residents, but I am certainly comfortable doing consent if y'all want to.
Very well. That being the case, 2021 Ordinance 48 will appear on next meeting's consent agenda. And just as a reminder, as we go through these things, certainly commissioners have the ability at any time before we take the issues up at our next meeting to move anything they see fit from consent to regular agenda. So certainly we want to make sure all items are discussed as fully as possible. That brings us to 2021-341. Mr. Administrator.
Commissioners, 2021-341 is a request to approve an Arpa funding request to the Kearney Senior Center for Hvac improvements. It is a request that comes from the auditor, but perhaps this is the place that it might be pointed out. I think there's very little dispute that the auditor is the proper and appropriate source for interpretation of the Arpa rules, the American Rescue Plan rules. He and one of his staff members could probably wake up in the middle of the night quoting the various clauses and interim final rules relative to the Arpa. And I say that somewhat kiddingly, but they are very highly informed, and they're a great resource for that kind of information. So it might be worth pointing out that the process that this entails is a submission, which is then delivered to the auditor for assessment, essentially of proper criteria, stipulations met, things of that sort. And at that point, the auditor and I go into great detail to discuss these requests and to see that they meet, the requirements and stipulations, and they're a qualified, certified request. And it's at that point that those requests come to the commission for discussion and elaboration and deliberation. I say that because not only is this one going to come up, but there's going to be a few others later in this agenda that have to do with that. And I just wanted to kind of confirm with the commission that these all have been vetted and certified as to their qualifications in terms of the rules relative to the American Rescue Plan Act. So that being said, I'll now turn the
By the
floor.
way, I just want to go ahead
I'm sorry.
and follow up with one, and it's an obvious one, but I want to make sure that it gets out there, and that is, what the statements you just made apply not just to this request, but to all requests
Absolutely.
made. So I just want to make sure there's no misunderstanding that this is a broad policy that you have outlined, not anything that is specific or I should say exclusive to this particular ordinance that we are, or I should say resolution that we are taking up.
The idea being that the commission now gets to discuss the merits.
Exactly. And I do make a slight differentiation between those that go to outside agencies and those that go internally. I think there's a little different quality. Clearly, we are more familiar as a commission with our internal operations than any other third party, just by fact of the proximity of it. Mr. Auditor, did you want to add anything to the administrator's comments as far as the general issue before we proceed with 2021-341?
No, I think Victor Hurlbert, Clay County Auditor, I think that's exactly what the administrator said. That's how we set up the application process, is to essentially allow, as the guidance directs, to have some community input on what the how recipients use these funds. And so, I see my role as auditor and looking at the guidance, like with anything, just to look at compliance, and then certainly, one thing can be eligible, of course, but then commission can use its discretion in policymaking to decide if they want to, modify that request or not. So yes, certainly if it meets the eligibility, but also if there are any other issues, that might present, other compliance issues, like with Single Audit Act, with just overall federal grants. So yeah, that's been the way we've operated.
No, I appreciate those comments. And the other, I think, observation I would have is that we are all, learning exactly how to go through this process. And I very much appreciate the openness that there is among the different areas of our government to be able to sit down and to make sure that we are able to react as the situation demands it, and we are able to make whatever adjustments the situation will demand. So I guess what I'm saying is I appreciate the openness of both the administration, of the auditor's office, and the other areas of government in continually looking at how this process goes forward to make sure that we don't find ourselves kind of on automatic pilot. And I appreciate the fact that everybody is so engaged on this issue. Thank you very much. So with that, let's go ahead and proceed to our...
Mr. Commissioner, I
Yes,
might
sir.
also point out there are representatives here from the Kearney Senior Center that might wish to make some comments.
Yes, I saw that. So yeah, I will, after we have our, any comments from the auditor on the, on 2021-341, then of course I would be happy to entertain any comments or any other input from the applicants. So please proceed.
Yes, Victor Hurlbert, Clay County Auditor. So Resolution 2021-341 deals with a American Rescue Plan Act request we received for the Kearney Senior Center coming through the Kearney Community Foundation, and as well as in cooperation with the city of Kearney. So essentially the request we got was an amount not to exceed $12,000 for new HVAC units and filtration systems at the Kearney Senior Center. They outline in their request, as you see, the reason that's critical and important to them, given their mission of providing food to seniors there. In reviewing the Arpa American Rescue Plan guidance, I noted three main areas where this is eligible. The first being ventilation systems, the second being assistance to nonprofits to respond to the pandemic, and of course they had to adapt because of COVID and how they're doing that and providing meals, and then finally giving assistance to households, which they are doing to seniors in need. So under all those three criteria, we put it on the agenda for the commission to consider. And yeah, without further ado, I'll leave it to the representatives from Kearney Senior Center and Kearney Community Foundation. I think we have Shirley Zimmerman and David Pavlich, so.
Before we go ahead and do that, let's see if there are any other questions of the auditor.
No questions, thanks.
No questions, thank you.
I do have a couple of things. One is, since it is up to a particular amount, I assume that this would be, as part of our previous discussion on this, these would be reimbursements once the actual hard numbers were known. Is that the way it would work?
Yeah, apologies about that. Victor Herbert, Clay County Auditor again. I was remiss in saying, so we did confirm as part of this. So the cities did get the rescue plan money as well. So we confirmed with them, one, that they had obligated all their funds, and that they confirmed that to be the case. So that was one thing. And then the second thing, a question we asked is, in their request, they indicated that they're going to seek, they have an estimate, then they're going to actually bid it out and get the actual dollar amounts. So, you know, the concern could be, you know, we pay this amount and then the bill comes in less or more. And so what we agreed on was essentially not to exceed $12,000 as an obligation. But what the senior center will do after the work is done is send us their invoices, and then we'll pay them for that to make payment to the vendor. So that's the agreement.
That makes a lot of sense. And I realize that was, while we are getting a little bit in the weeds there, I think it helps, especially in these initial projects, to go through that. And then as we go forward with other projects, as that becomes more of the pattern that we work from, we won't need to go through it in quite so much detail in future projects, hopefully, but it would just be our known method of operating.
Sure, absolutely.
So with that, yes, please, the folks from Kearney.
Thank you very much. I'm Shirley Zimmerman. I am an employee of the City of Kearney. I've been for 29 years, and I'm president of the Kearney Senior Board. We are totally funded by Clay County Senior Board for our general operations. When something big comes up, we have to seek other sources or do fundraising, and that was why we applied for this. We want to put humidifiers on all 3 of our units and air purifiers, and just put better quality air in our building to supply our residents. And we are very much willing to we will invoice you. I already have back 2 out of 3 bids, and my intention is to have this installed over Christmas when we're closed, if you all approve the funds. And we just really appreciate your support.
And although this is once again a technical question, as you go forward and as you contract with people to do this, I assume that the strength of a signed resolution will be enough to assure the money will be there when it is requested.
Yes.
There's no additional documentation need
Yes.
to be made.
Yeah, if you approve that resolution, then we will move forward, and then we will just invoice you as soon as, like I said, we really hope to, if you approve this, my goal is to have this installed over Christmas break.
Very good. Commissioner Thompson, do you have any questions or comments?
I have no questions, but I think this would be a lovely little Christmas present. And as a human being who is very fond of central air and warmth inside, I think this is very appropriate.
Well, we really appreciate it. We are consolidating, we are going to be growing and going to 5 days a week, and so this will be good to know that this heating unit was on its last legs, so.
But we want to make sure you guys have a nice, safe place for people to go, and so I'm all for this. So as long as my other
Thank you very
fellow
much.
commissioners are, so.
Very good. Commissioner Carpenter, do you have any comments or questions?
Just a quick comment, which is thank you for the work that you do, as well as the Community Foundation there in Kearney. And it's a real pleasure to get to support you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Very good. Are there any other persons who would care to comment on this issue before we go forward? Seeing none. Yeah, I agree. This is a very worthy use of our Arpa monies. With that, since it does obviously include the expenditure of funds, it seems appropriate to be on next meeting's regular agenda, if that is the consensus. Therefore, 2021-341 will appear on next week's regular agenda. That brings us to 2021-322, and it looks as though this is the ever-present Mr. Auditor. Mr. Administrator, would you like to proceed on that?
Sure. 2021-322 is a request for a transfer within funds, and the auditor remains at the podium to make comments on that.
Please proceed.
Yes, Victor Herbert, Clay County Auditor. Resolution 2021-322 is essentially a request to transfer within a fund in the Road and Bridge Fund, and then to make a payment to Fund 655, the Road Improvement Fees Fund. So the backstory on this is essentially what we had by Resolution 2019-266. A subdivision was approved there not too far, 35 and 69 with Prairie Field subdivision. Subdivision was approved at the time with the stipulation that county would make some improvements to the roads there. And looking at in 10 years was the assessment at that point. Ranged from a low point of $290,000 to a high point of $1.3 million. So a rather large amount to make improvements. So to give an idea of how this works in other scenarios, if a individual wants to make an improvement to their property, we have the Fund 655 available for them to make deposit. And then once everything is cleared for permitting, highway does the work, and that deposit then is sent back to the highway fund to reimburse them for that work. And so that mechanism at the time, once it's passed, I recommended to the former administration would be the way we could treat this same thing, because while it's not an individual, it's a subdivision, it meets the same purpose. That advice was ignored. They wanted a separate fund for an entire subdivision. I disagreed to do that as a counting officer, and as a result, these monies were put into the highway fund. The problem when you put these monies into the highway fund, it's a liability on our books, and every penny gets spent on operational needs. So what we've done, we have corrected all the monies that were dedicated for Prairie Field subdivision this year, working with the treasurer. It's not just the road impact fee, it's all planning and zoning fees. But for the 2020 activity, that's when it started, when the subdivision began. And since it's from a prior year, we need to have something like this. So by approving this, ultimately what happens is we approve the amount of all planning and zoning revenues from Prairie Field subdivision in 2020, which has been audited thoroughly, and the treasurer's office will then make a payment back to Fund 655. The reason I didn't choose a transfer between funds is because Fund 655 does not have the appropriate revenue accounts. It's a different type of accounting fund. So that's really the kind of high-level description on that, but I'm happy to ask any questions or concerns.
You'd obviously referenced the whole transaction surrounding the Prairie Field development, which I think had something less than a universal appeal among our government here. I tend to agree with you and your assessment on how you had proposed. It is a pity that we did not follow that advice. But this seems like a way that we can honor the obligations that we are under, and it seems to do it in a responsible way. Commissioner Carpenter, do you have any comments or questions?
No questions, thanks.
Commissioner Thompson?
No questions, thank you.
Okay. Transfer between funds.
Consent.
Just got a little bit of a prompt, thank you. Since it is between funds and no actual expenditures, consent has been recommended. Is everybody okay with consent? Very good. 2021-322 will appear on our consent agenda next meeting. That brings us to a substantial packet, which is 2021-324. Mr. Administrator.
Commissioners, 2021-324 is a request to approve IFB number 8221, which is a term and supply contract with Green Dream International, LLC, Auditor Incorporated, New Frontier Materials, and Buildex, LLC, all who provide rock and aggregate materials for highway and transportation, and Deputy Administrator Walters is at the podium for further comments.
Please proceed.
Good afternoon, Commission. Carl Walters, Director of Administrations for Clay County. This is a bid that we had to renew, sent out to get several bidders on rock that we need. Service the Highway Department. That is with the reason why we have so many vendors that we need is for the big rock, the line ditch rock, the chips that we use for our chip seal program and the gravel roads that we use on the Type 5 to keep them maintained. So this is for the ongoing year, as we approve the budget and stuff, that we can turn around and maintain our roads.
Okay. Does anyone on the commission have any comments or questions? Commissioner Thompson?
No questions, no comments.
Commissioner Carpenter?
No questions. Thanks.
Looks to me like this is just an agreement, so is a consent appropriate for everybody?
I'm comfortable with that, yep.
Very well. 2021-324 will go on next meeting's consent agenda. That brings us to 2021 Ordinance 46. Mr. Administrator.
Commissioner, 2021-Ordinance 46 is a request to approve a state block grant agreement with the Missouri Highways and Transportation Commission. It is an airport request, and Deputy Minister Walters is at the podium for further comments.
Please proceed.
Good afternoon, Commission. Carl Walters, Deputy County Administrator, Clay County. If I have this one right, Ordinance 46 is a coronavirus relief program agreement for CARES Act for $23,000 that we'll have given to us to be used for operations, personal cleaning, sanitation, janitorial service, combating the spread of pathogens at the airport, and debt service payments.
Okay. Is this,
If I may,
excuse me?
I
Yes,
think
please.
I think Deputy Administrator Walters might have just given you information relative to Ordinance 47.
My apologies, I probably did.
All right.
I probably did.
So maybe we should give him back the floor, and he can go to,
Okay.
Thank you for that clarification, because I think, yeah, that.
I've got the other one, yeah.
Okay, go right ahead.
To go with the ordinance 46 originally would be the federal block funding grant, or the amount of $245,645.
Right.
State block grant offering $32,000 at 100%, and the remaining $212,670 at a 90-10 match, with the design portion of the runway, which we are involved in with right now, the rehabilitation of the asphalt overlay. The cost to the county is part of the project will not exceed on our part $23,630 in matching funds.
Okay. And what we're looking at here is to accept those outside grant monies.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah, I just want to say that, this is very, this is a great thing that we're able to get this kind of money. Certainly, the airport is a great asset, and I think an underutilized one, underappreciated one. The length of the runway, certainly, as I say almost every time this comes up, is something that is maybe not quite unique, but certainly we stand apart with our ability to accommodate larger aircraft, and certainly the runway is needs to be repaired from time to time. So I'm very pleased that we were able to get this money, and that we're able to maintain this asset to the degree that we can.
Right, and that helps us with that $4 million, so that means that we're not out that much money for the county, so that's a blessing on our part, and as long as we turn around and keep good things happening at the airport, these fundings continue to come in for the airport.
Thank you. Comments from, or questions from the other commissioners? Commissioner Carpenter?
No questions.
Commissioner Thompson?
No questions, but good job on grants. I like that.
Yes.
Keep the good times rolling.
Yep.
Very well. With that, since this is the acceptance of a block grant, 2021 Ordinance 46 on the consent agenda.
That's fine.
Well, I
Spending some
think there is going to be some expenditure,
there's
so
a commitment of dollars here.
Okay, there is a commitment.
just on that
of dollars.
90-10 piece, yeah.
Okay, well, in that case, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
The recommendation then is to put it on regular agenda. Does that make sense? Since we are committing, we're not spending, but, okay, very well. 2021 Ordinance 46 will appear on next week's regular agenda. Thank you. That brings us to 2021 Ordinance 47.
Commissioners, will do a rewind on to 2021 Ordinance 47. It's a request to approve a coronavirus relief grant program agreement, again with Missouri Highways and Transportation Commission. It's another airport request, and Deputy Administrator Walters is here to restate his request.
Please proceed.
Good afternoon, Commission. Carl Walters, Deputy Director of Administrations. Apologize. This is a relief grant for agreement of the amount of $23,000 in funds through the CARSA Act that we've had previously, that we've dealt with in the general funds airport, and utilizing the costs of the operations personnel that we can use for cleaning, sanitation, janitorial service, combating the spread of pathogens at the airport, and the debt service payments.
Very good. Are there any questions of the Deputy Administrator from the Commission?
Questions? Thanks.
Seeing none. Is this simply just the acceptance of, this is not obligated, it's okay. In that case, 2021 Ordinance 47, if it's the consensus, will go on consent agenda. Very good.
Thank you, Commission.
Thank you. That brings us to 2021-325. Mr. Administrator.
Commissioners, Auditor Hurlburt made a valiant effort to overtake Captain Agderian for time spent at the podium, but the evidence is clear he's still a distant second, and Captain Agderian is about to come up and put the hammer down. 2021-325 is a request to approve RFP number 8021, a term and supply contract with Xander eSolutions, Inc. for web page design and development. This is a request from the Sheriff's Department, and Captain Agderian has taken a position at the podium that she will not relinquish for further comments.
Very good. Please proceed.
Captain Amy Agderian, Clay County Sheriff's Office. I'm just going to go in order. We'll get to what he's referring to shortly. This request is to approve a term and supply bid with Xander eSolutions for the creation and hosting of the Sheriff's Office website. And we are looking to go with this company because, well, we did the RFP process, and of the 6 bids that were selected for us to review, Xander is a local company. They have history. They gave us the lowest bid. And again, the fact that they are local, not quite a Clay County company, but right in Riverside, they will be responsive to our needs. So we are asking that, that this contract be approved so that we can further reach the public. The Sheriff's Office has made a huge effort to be accessible via social media, and this website is going to be translatable to several languages. It's going to be responsive as a mobile app as well, or not an app, but it will be responsive on mobile devices. So it's going to be accessible to the public in several formats that our current website it's not accessible. The one we're using now is it's not a good tool. So we want to make sure that we are keeping up with the progressive demands of the public and being transparent with how we communicate.
Thank you. Are there any questions of the captain?
No, thanks.
Mr. Thompson?
No questions at the moment. Thank you.
And then there was a second issue you wanted to address, or was that, that completes this
Yeah,
one?
that's this.
We're good.
Okay, very
Yes.
good. Very good. This is agreement, so consent. So unless is there any disagreement, the 2021-325 be on our consent agenda?
That's fine.
Works for me. Thanks.
Thank you. Therefore, 2021-325 will go on next meeting's consent agenda. That brings us to 2021-326.
I'm going to give you 2 more independently before I give you the group. So 2021-326 is a request to approve the attached memorandum of understanding with the North Kansas City School District for gas reimbursement. It again comes from the Sheriff's Department, and Captain Agderian is here for more information.
Please proceed.
Captain Amy Agderian, Clay County Sheriff's Office. This MOU is between the Sheriff's Office and the North Kansas City School District As you know, we have a fairly sizable school resource unit, and I think we're up to, what, 17? 17 deputies in the school district. And part of the concern that the school district and the sheriff's office have is the amount of time that it takes to refuel these vehicles. So in order for our deputies to go as far as from Winnetonka area, say, is probably one of the largest distances, to the county fuel pumps on 116th, I mean, you're looking at an hour by the time you go travel up, refuel, come back. And if they do that 2, possibly 3 times a week, depending on what the nature of their assignment is that week, I mean, it's a lost amount of time that the deputies are in the school district, multiplied by 17. We just decided that maybe there was a better way to approach that. So the school district actually approached our school resource unit and offered to let our school resource officers refuel at the district pumps so that they can remain in district, closer response time, and then essentially they would bill us for fuel, and then rather than us paying for gas to the highway department, for instance, for those particular people, they'll refuel at the pumps, we'll get a monthly bill to reimburse the school district to refuel there.
Does anybody have any questions or comments?
Sounds fantastic, thank you.
Mr. Thompson? Okay, 2021-326 consent agenda sound okay with everybody? Very well, 2021-326 will appear on next week's consent agenda. That brings us to 2021-327. Mr. Administrator?
Commissioners, 2021-327 is another request to approve a memorandum of understanding, this being with Tri-County Mental Health Services, and Captain Agdarian is here for further comment.
Please proceed.
Captain Amy Agdarian, Clay County Sheriff's Office. This MOU is an agreement between the Sheriff's Office and Tri-County Mental Health for a trained social worker to be assigned to the Sheriff's Office with the salary cost shared by the Sheriff's Office and Tri-County Mental Health. This came about due to, well, several needs, but with the creation of the CIT, that's Crisis Intervention Team Unit, this is training that's gone on for years and years, but the Sheriff's Office has dedicated a unit of personnel to service people in crisis in the community. So when we arrive on calls and people are having, they're influenced by a crisis, either a mental health crisis, a substance abuse fueled crisis, we have personnel that are trained to respond to that particular need, approaching people in a more holistic way than just assuming everything is, because they are breaking the law. So some people need just a little bit of extra help. It's nice to have this unit in place, but now to have a trained social worker arriving on calls with us is a great asset to the public, but to the Sheriff's Office, it also gives our staff the ability to work with a social worker in-house on some of the mental health issues that plague law enforcement sometimes.
Very good. This is something that this is one of the reforms is not maybe the right word, certainly one of the modernizations, one of the initiatives, I guess is the best word that our sheriff has put forward in this area. Certainly it's one I think that is very forward-looking, and I'm glad we're going down this particular road. It's just it's a good example of the leadership being expressed in the Sheriff's Department. So are there any other questions or comments on 327?
No questions, thank you.
Okay, this does involve the expenditures of money, so my recommendation would be put on a regular agenda. Is there consensus on that?
Agreed.
2021-327 will be on next week's regular agenda. That brings us to 2021-328. Please proceed.
Commissioners, this is what I kind of gave you early warning on. We're going to deviate just slightly from process at this point. The Sheriff's Office has very appropriately identified a variety of projects that they would like to direct Arpa funds to. And again, these are projects that have absolutely been vetted by the Auditor's office and myself as well in terms of criteria and also appropriateness for the request. So what I've asked Captain Agderian to do, I'll give you the numbers, 2021 -328, -329, -330, -331, -334, which is a sole source vendor request, but it is a companion to an Arpa request, 311, 335, which is another sole source vendor request, again, a companion to 312, and 337 and 338. I've asked Captain Agderian if she would identify each resolution, give you some detail to that resolution, and also the amount attached to that resolution without interruption. We won't be going back and forth between me and her. She's just going to give you the detail as we go down the list. I gave you some paper there if you want to make any particular notes specific to a resolution. And with that, if you don't have any questions about process,
I just want to clarify a
Go
little
ahead.
on process. So what you're proposing is to bracket together, and I'm just going to read the numbers just to make sure that we have it, to make sure it's clear in my mind.
Sure.
So, and I will leave off the 2021 prefix, they all have that. 328, 329, 330, 331, 334, excuse me, 311, 335, 312, 337, and 338.
That is correct.
Those would all be companion grouped together.
Yes, and Captain Agderian will identify each as she talks about them.
Very good. Is is everybody good with that?
I'm ready.
I
Very
will
good.
give-
Please proceed.
I will give her the floor.
Okay.
One more
Yes.
process question. Do you want to pause between each one to do consent or regular, or do you want to address that at the end?
My thought process is if we're going to group these, that we group them, that we retain them as a group. And this is a good question. It seemed to me that, and these are obviously going to be having expenditures, so I can't see how most of these do not end up on regular. If we separate out the ones that might qualify as consent as we go along, I think that might just add to the confusion. I think
Yes.
keeping them as a group maybe would make more sense in spite of the fact that some of these would be appropriate on consent. There's no harm putting them on regular.
Okay.
Is that consistent with everything?
Yeah, and I feel like they're all ARPA funding requests, so they're all going to be expenditures of
They
funds.
are, there are two in the list that are sole source vendor requests that do not involve any expenditure. I agree with the commissioner. There's no harm in that continuing to stay with the packet. What I asked Captain Agderian is if any of you have a question at any time, at any place, simply signify and she'll stop and address that particular question. So feel free to ask a question anytime in the process.
With that, Captain, instead of me pausing in each one and asking questions, if you could, as you come to the end of each subject, pause and ask for questions. That way, we're sort of shortening the formality of me asking for comments. I don't mind having you do that, if that's okay. I think that'll make the process easier.
Okay.
Please proceed then, unless there's any further questions, please proceed.
Okay. Captain Amy Agderian, Clay County Sheriff's Office. I do approach this with a little bit of a feeling of humor because I'm looking at my three cohorts in the back of the room and they saw the list of items on the agenda and were like, man, I don't know about this. I promise it's going to go fast. Okay. I do appreciate County Administrator Salisbury and for coming to me with a process that might speed this up. I appreciate Victor Hurlbert for his assistance in gathering this material and presenting it to you. And I appreciate your willingness to change the format for just a little bit. All right. What I want to say about these requests is, as I go through each resolution, I'm not going to go in order that they're printed on the agenda, because I want to give you a picture of how they are all related to this one request. So it'll make sense as to why we've bundled everything, but their order on the agenda doesn't quite fit with my narrative. So I'll point them out as we go. What I want to start out by telling you is that based on the 2021 Missouri Sheriff's Association directory, Clay County is the 6th smallest county in the state of Missouri by square miles. And yet, it's the 3rd largest jail in the state. So what this tells me, and we have the 4th largest staff of any sheriff's office in the state of Missouri. So what this tells me is that we have a huge responsibility, a huge asset in the detention center specifically, and the sheriff's office as a whole has fallen behind in technology and equipment in the last 5 years, for a lot of reasons. I mean, you'll see the numbers we're asking for. Those funds aren't always available. The problem is, now we're suffering. COVID created unprecedented challenges for everybody, but what it did to law enforcement, to say it's unprecedented is kind of an understatement, but what it did for us here in Clay County is it left us with demand for law enforcement services continuing. And the expectations as we delivered those services were still in place, and they were increased because we needed to respond in the same manner the public came to expect, as also municipalities came to expect, and yet there were stricter restrictions on us and how we had to respond to COVID. What this did was highlighted some areas that the Sheriff's Office could improve on, and that's why we are here today with these ARPA requests. I'm going to tell you the total ARPA request today is $4,077,353.29. I want to talk first about Resolution 2021-329. This is for Central Square. Central Square as itself is $702,722.25. Central Square is essentially the central nervous system of the Sheriff's Office, we hope, with the approval of these ARPA funds. Central Square will replace the Keystone operating system that we use in the Sheriff's Office. Keystone, we first started entering jail records, CAD records, records management for the whole Sheriff's Office. We write reports in Keystone. Everything is driven by Keystone, all of our information. However, that system is nearing it's nearing about 18 years of age in service in the Sheriff's Office, and the technology is not going to keep up with the demands of the public and our efficiency as a Sheriff's Office, what we could be doing. Central Square is already being used by several municipalities in Clay County, either in practice now or they are in development to go to Central Square. Central Square is going to allow intercommunications between the Sheriff's Office services in-house, as well as our ability to coordinate information with those other municipalities that are using it, namely in various stages of utilization: Excelsior Springs, Gladstone Public Safety, Liberty. Am I missing anyone else? Okay. And what happens is, as this database is built out, those other agencies have already created their municipal databases, which exist in Clay County. So part of that work has already been done for what we would need, because we are responsible for all of that information as well. Okay, questions on Central Square? Okay. All right, Resolution 2021-338. This is a request to upgrade computer and technology within the Sheriff's Office. The dollar amount is $370,776.27. When I referred to dated equipment, there are some computers that we have that are still running on operating systems like, I think, Windows 7, Windows 10, and we need to upgrade our software, but also the devices. We've got some computers that go back to older than 2015, and so this request is addressing those devices that are older than that were put into service prior to 2015, as well as a request for new Hvac computers, which are the mobile data terminals that go into the cars and allow our personnel in the field to communicate with the CAD system, in this case, back to Central Square. So I'm trying to relay to you how these things just build on one another. So we start with Central Square. The computer technology upgrade will interface with Central Square, which will then spread throughout the entire department and those people in the field. to have updated equipment. By the way, having the GTACs available to personnel in the field allows them to self-dispatch for certain functions, and the Central Square software will allow that with more ease than Keystone does currently. Questions? Okay. 2021-330, we now move into the vehicle portion of the ARPA request, and that dollar amount is $348,000. These transport vehicles, we're asking for 6 SUVs that are equipped specifically to deal with the transport of prisoners locally. So we're talking cages that are, I hate that word in a vehicle, but partitions in the vehicle that allows for 2 people to sit in the back seat with a partition between them so that they can be socially distanced and moving about from facility to facility back to our detention center. And so when I talked about the ways that we can mitigate COVID, by minimizing the number of people coming into our facility, we are able to better control the flow of people in and out, the number of people in and out. Just think about how many different people they are coming into contact with, and it's exponential. So our transport unit is going to use these vehicles to pick up municipal prisoner transports locally to and from those municipalities with our vehicles, our personnel, our safety in place. The computer technology, the GTACs, will be placed in these vehicles. Okay, any questions?
I don't have a question, I have a comment, and that is I'm very happy to see this one because one of the things that causes me personally concern about the safety of our officers is in fact prisoner transfers. So I'm very happy to see that that I think logical and reasonable concern is being addressed here to keep our officers safe and to quite frankly keep the prisoners, those people in our custody safe as well. So thank you. I think this is one that I think has a more personal aspect to it.
Good, good. Well, and what I didn't say earlier is that Sheriff Aiken is here, and Emergency Management Director Melissa Evans is here as well. But the work that went into these ARPA requests, I mean, there were so many people working on it, and Captain Phil Kofer is the one who put together the computer technology update and the request for vehicles for the transfer unit, and he did a great amount of work to put that information together. There's a lot here. Okay. The next resolution is 2021-328. This is the Detention and Public Safety Bidirectional Antenna Project. Dollar amount is $163,970.08. The easiest way to describe this is if you are in detention or you are in the lower floor of the public safety building, you cannot get out on the radio. You can't communicate with dispatch. You can't communicate with people outside that building on the radios that we have. So, by placing an antenna on the public safety building and on the detention center, and by purchasing radios for detention staff that don't have the full capability of the ones that we have out in the field, but that still can communicate on the radio network, we will be able to provide communications to staff in the jail, from the kitchen to the housing floor to the 3rd floor where there's an open day room. You know, when things go bad, it's nice to be able to communicate with people. So that bidirectional antenna will give full radio communication capability to staff in detention, on the lower floor of the public safety building, to people in the field. Questions? All right. All right, the next one is 2021-331. This one dealt us a little bit of a fit this year. There were a lot of back and forth about bids on how do we address the camera and PCS system in detention. This is the touch screen that unlocks the doors to cells, to day rooms, to exterior doors, and the camera systems associated with it. The dollar amount on this is $2,001,137. This project is critical. We have locks that are failing in detention currently. We have cameras that are offline, that can't see around corners, and that is a concern. We've spent a lot of time this year going back and forth with different vendors about, their capability. And what we found was there were vendors that could deal with the camera issue and vendors that could deal with the touchscreen issue, but there wasn't one that could do both. And we've worked with facilities, Director Kuntz, to try to figure out how we can make this happen, because it seemed silly and wasteful to have two separate companies coming in to run cable until we found Imperium. And Imperium does have a cooperative contract with Greene County. We approved that through purchasing. And they will be able to come in and do both the cameras and the touch screens in one fell swoop. All right, questions? Okay.
Counselor had a question, I believe.
And I apologize, I probably am not getting it right. It's referencing the cameras and touchscreens.
Yes.
But there's also reference to failures in the locks on the cells themselves. Is that right?
No, I'm
Is
sorry.
this replacing the locks?
No.
Okay.
It is not, it doesn't replace the locks themselves.
Okay.
Those can be replaced by facilities if they fail.
One at a time?
Yes.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
There's
It's not the locks that are damaged,
Okay.
it's the communication to the locks.
That's what I was thinking
Okay.
it probably was. Okay.
All right. All right, next we have companion items. The first is 2021-312. This is a sole source request. I'm sorry, it's 2021-335 is the sole source request with Kim Image. And I mean, basically the sole source being that we researched this, and this was the only company that provided the VeroVision mail system, which is 2021-312. And what this VeroVision system does, dollar amount is $186,790. It allows for mail, incoming mail, to be screened for illicit substances and contaminants without having to open the mail itself. So you run it through a screener, and it can detect the presence of narcotics, opioids. I believe it can detect the presence of marijuana residue. And certainly, it's going to be able to scan through and see if there is any kind of contraband in it as well. So,
Yeah, I did have one question. I was just kind of curious how sensitive they were. So, I mean, if someone were to pick it up, if someone were, say, handling drugs, there weren't drugs in the package, but that the person had put it on there, and it's more of just a observational question. It's not really substantive, but I was just curious as to how sensitive that equipment was, if that is known at the moment.
you know, that's a good question. I don't have an answer for, the residue off someone's hand if they were handling as they passed mail through. The implications of that would be hard to track, but what we would be concerned about is if it was enough residue on someone's hand to still be present on the documents, then we want to make sure that doesn't go to the housing floor.
Yeah, and my implication was not that but that it would be someone from the outside who might be
Right.
sending something into an inmate. And to tell you the truth, it seems to me that it would be a good practice to err on the side of caution in those circumstances, and then, at least better to have it more sensitive than not sensitive enough, I guess.
Absolutely. I don't have an exact response for that, but it's a good question.
Well, like I say, it's a
Certainly.
little bit in the weeds, and I kind of hesitate to ask it, but it just struck me as curious.
That's all right. I think if it's there, we'll find it.
As Mr. Counselor.
Again, sorry, I apologize for interrupting. Because we're talking about potential legal mail going into the facility.
Yes.
This technology won't allow you to read
No.
anything. It's only going to sense contraband.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay, was there any other question on that point before we go forward? Please proceed.
I am almost done. All right. Resolution 334 is a sole source request for Hvac conveyors. And the reason we are requesting sole source status for that vendor is because of the companion item Arpa request in the amount of $54,872 to replace some failing parts and upgrade the conveyor system in the inmate property room in the detention center. Hvac Conveyors was the company that originally built the conveyor system in the new detention center, and the person who actually did the planning for that still works for Hvac Conveyors, so it made sense to reach out to them and ask them to come in and give us a bid to just upgrade and strengthen that conveyor system. And the reason we need to do that is because if you think about like a dry cleaners, this conveyor system, when an inmate comes in, we take their property, we put things in Ziploc bags if it's appropriate, small items. Clothing goes into these mesh bags, and then you hang them on the conveyor system and send them on up the way, and you rotate the conveyor as new inmates come in, and you add to the conveyor. But as they are released, you have to bring the conveyor back around to find their bag. We have a lot of inmates come through since this conveyor system was built. The problem now is it's failing, it's old, and as property bags fall off of this conveyor system because it's not strong enough to hold the continued use, you're going to have property, clothing, possible contaminants piling on the floor. So, and I didn't mention this earlier, but all of these requests relate basically to one of about 3 or 4 ARPA considerations, and that is congregate living facilities, response to the public health needs, and then the need to promote distance learning, as well as the need to gather data for response to the pandemic. And I'm not using the buzzwords, but that's essentially how we are approaching this. And the specific ARPA eligibility is listed on the RCA forms. All right, so that is the Hvac conveyor sole source and the conveyor system upgrade. All right, any questions on that?
I'm sorry, you said there was a companion, is that 311?
Yeah, yes, 311.
next, okay.
Well, 334 was the sole source. 311 is the request for $54,872.
Okay, I just want to make sure we hadn't skipped the next thing. Thank you.
We are almost done. All right, the final ARPA request is 2021-337, and this is for the Mobile Incident Command Center. Again, Melissa Evans is here and can speak to this a little bit more if you guys are tired of hearing from me yet. But basically, the Mobile Incident Command Center in the dollar amount of $249,085.69, thereabouts. As I believe it may be a little bit less than that with some equipment coming off of it, but that was the quote for this incident command center. And what this will do is replace the current incident command trailer, which has been on its last leg for quite some time. And we would like to replace it with this new vehicle that will be able to go out into the public and provide a resource for education. I believe Director Evans is planning to use it for educational events and possibly some vaccine events as well, working with the health department. So it's going to be present more out into the community than to be used on the campus here at the Sheriff's Office, but it certainly would be an asset considering the sad state of the current incident command trailer.
So this is going to be a Ford 3, excuse me, this is not going to be a Ford 350, excuse me, a Ford Transit.
Yes, I believe this one is a transit, yes.
The reason I say that is I remember when they first came out, then Governor Nixon was there when they were coming out, and he's a tall gentleman. He was able to stand in the back of this vehicle very comfortably. So it's a good-sized vehicle, and I think appropriate to its usage.
Yes. Did you want to add any additional information about that? Okay. All right. That wraps it up for the ARPA requests. I appreciate your patience and hanging out with us there.
Very good. We certainly appreciate the amount of work done, and so many of these are important things. I'd note that they are not ongoing expenses, but they are very appropriately one-time expenses that are absolutely necessary, and I think it's a great opportunity for us to upgrade the support that we give our law enforcement professionals out there in the Sheriff's Department. So I'm pretty thrilled to see that we're able to put this together. This is something that, absent this particular bit of money that seems to have fallen in our laps, would be a very difficult thing to budget for, and it would take certainly a prolonged period of time for us to put that money together to make these expenditures. So I'm very happy that the Sheriff's Department has been able to recognize the opportunity and to use it in the best interest of our citizens. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Comments or questions from the Commission?
I do, please. Thank you, Commissioner. So as a package, first of all, thank you for your work on this. Thank you. Each of these individual items seems like a good use of resources, and I'm grateful to you and the sheriff and everybody else who's worked on it, as well as the auditor. You know, one of the things that's important for us to be doing is finding eligible ways to use these federal dollars. You know, as Commissioner Nolte mentioned, as a wonderful opportunity provided to us by our current federal leadership to give us, you know, essentially $48 million to be able to finance things that otherwise would be very difficult to pay for. And so it is a good opportunity, and I'm glad that we are seeing the benefit of it. I do want to ask bigger picture. You know, obviously one of our tasks is to be good stewards of that money, and not, you know, make sure that as eligible expenses come up over the next year or 2 years, that we're able to pay for them using these dollars. And so, you know, and I know that the sheriff and the sheriff's office wants to be good stewards of public money as well. One question I have is just as a package. Obviously, we've approved some ARPA requests previously to the sheriff's office, as well as CARES Act dollars before that. Do you all have any sense of, going into the future, how many more requests may be coming? And I ask that only because we're talking, you know, $4 million today,
Yes.
in addition to money spent before. And what I do want to have some sense of is sort of some totals that we might be anticipating over time.
That's a fair question. Absolutely. You know, these ARPA requests have been streaming in across my desk for several months now, and the first round of requests, as they come in, I give them to the sheriff, and he and the major review those requests to determine, first of all, is this something that we want to pursue with the commission? And so we've already taken several requests off the table and decided in-house that this is probably something that should not be presented as an ARPA request. So we've vetted internally and presented or requested to the administrator and the auditor only those requests that are beyond our capability to budget for or to pay for out of current operating funds. Moving forward in the future, I know that there is discussion of one other request, and it's less than $200,000. I know that there is another request that may tie in with an issue of co-located dispatch, which we are going to bring up after the first of the year, but that too is under $200,000. I don't believe that there's going to be very many more requests, because we tried to gather everything to present at one time because it made sense on a department-wide level to ask for this at one time, if that makes sense?
Oh, no, that's very
Okay.
helpful information. And I think doing it this way is perfect. Love the way you guys have handled it all the way through this moment. But having some sense of into the future, maybe just a couple more is all that is currently being contemplated. That's
I will
very
not
helpful
be
too.
coming back to ask for $4 million in
Gotcha,
ARPA
yeah.
requests, and I see the sheriff coming, so I defer to him.
Mr. Sheriff, please proceed.
Thank you. Will Aiken, Clay County Sheriff. To answer your question, Commissioner, we were really very deliberate on what we presented to the commission. Anything in the future, it's going to be very deliberate as well. The reason why we didn't clump it into this package is because we don't know what the future is going to bring. So we very well may not come to you with those additional requests because there are other partners involved in it, and if they're not able to do their part, then we won't be able to do our part. So if anything does come to the commission in the future, it will be known to you, or we will let you know. But this is everything that we've been working on this entire year. All these projects are projects that I have presented to you in the past for shortcomings in the detention center, as well as our capabilities doing our job, but as well as being able to work with our community partners, for example, during the COVID response. And everything that we've presented, which was very well done by Captain Agdarian, but there's so much more information that comes with these requests. And I'm not going to bore you with the stories. I don't think they're boring at all, but I can share with you some critical stories. One, for example, the BDA, the bidirectional antenna project in the detention center. We had some paperwork that came in that had narcotics on it, and that's the reason for the chem image request. But that item actually got into the hands of 2 inmates, 2 of which died. 1 we brought back with Narcan. 4 deputies also had to be Narcaned because they were exposed to it. During this whole incident, no one could communicate on the radio because it's old analog system. Now, can you imagine you're having people dropping like flies and you can't call for help? So this is the reason why we're asking for these particular projects to be fulfilled. Everything else we've been able to discuss and process, and most of it can be handled in-house with the budget that we've currently been given and planned for next year's budget once the commission approves that. So if that answers your question, then.
Oh, it totally does. Like I say, it's just a matter of planning future uses of this
Yes.
of this pool of money and having some sense of how much more, how much we have available for other uses is helpful to know. And it sounds like this is going to be the bulk of it, and it's very helpful. So thank you.
Definitely the bulk of it. The one thing that I do want to point out is with potential changes with ARPA funds being spent, there may be another approach to the commission by the sheriff's office to request some additional funds for the Law Enforcement Resource Center. But we won't know until that happens. And working with the Clay County Auditor's Office and Auditor Victor Hobart, once that happens, we'll work together. We'll work together with the county administrator, and we'll put something together to present to you then.
Understood. Thanks.
Okay? Thank you.
Thank you. And by the way, that was a good point that you made, Mr. Sheriff, that there is still some flex in the rules for expenditure of these funds. So certainly we have to be flexible enough to change with the changing situation, and we will see if that presents further opportunities.
Thank you.
Commissioner Thompson, did you have any comments or questions?
I do, thank you. So I will start by saying, Captain Agdarian, you did a wonderful job of painting this beautiful picture for us and taking us through this journey of all this paperwork. So, and it's always a joy to see you. I always enjoy seeing you. So the only real question I have is, what timeline are we looking at here? Are you guys wanting to have this done in the next 6 months? Is this going to take the remainder of next year? Like, will we have time to tap into the other round of money? Like, I didn't know if you guys need it all grouped. Like, what does this look like?
Well, some things can happen right away. Like, for instance, the 6 vehicles, we can order them, but I don't know when they'll be built, sadly. I mean, with supply chain issues and chip shortages, that really has, it's kind of made it difficult for us. The other issues, sorry, I strayed away from my notes here. Okay, so a lot of these things are, we can order them now. The Mobile Incident Command Center can be we can order these things pretty quickly. 9 month, okay. So, I mean, honestly, it's probably going to be third quarter before the majority of these things are in place, but the reason it's taken so long to bring it to you is because of so much research that has to be done. And so when we bring Imperium in to do the PCS system, I don't know what that's going to look like, but I imagine it's going to be pretty labor intensive. I would say by this year or this time next year, this will be done and in place.
Wonderful. Good.
Yeah,
That's kind of what I was getting at, all my talking.
all of it.
Yeah, wonderful. Okay, well, I don't have any-
Thank you for your time, Commission. I appreciate it.
Thank you, and I do want to point out that not only were these items submitted with the screening process we had mentioned earlier with the administrator and the auditor, but in the case of certainly the Sheriff's Department, it was done with close cooperation and a lot of communication, which we certainly appreciate. We appreciate that ability for everyone to work in such close quarters and to come out with the best possible proposals for the citizens of this county.
Thank you, and he's stepping out, but I also want to mention that Director Shaw has been in conversations with the Sheriff's Office regarding Central Square, and we are working with IT to bring some of these things to fruition as well.
Thank you for that acknowledgement. That's certainly well-deserved on his part, to be acknowledged for his part in these proposals.
Yeah.
Any other further comments or questions? Mr. Administrator.
Just one other little comment, and you alluded to it, and I think it's worth pointing out. One of the things that the auditor and I have attempted to communicate to people that want to enter into the sweepstakes for the Arpa funds is to do something that has a one-time expense rather than ongoing expenses that somebody might ultimately be obligated for down the road. And I think the Sheriff's Office has done a good job of doing that. Sometimes it's impossible to avoid maintenance fees that are ongoing when you incorporate a new software or something, but the larger expenses and the larger costs presented here, and also by the other people that have reached out to us, they've been pretty faithful to making these one-time expenses that they won't be hindered by in years to come. So you started that comment, and I think that's worth pointing out.
No, I think it is entirely worth pointing out because I think that's part of the responsible expenditure of these funds is that we are not obligating future commissions and future county governments to issues that they will have no control over unnecessarily. So I appreciate that being such a front and center consideration as these projects are considered. Did you have any? With that, here we are. And I'll go ahead and read the list, but I'll just say the items we just went through will be in a grouping, and I think it's pretty clear, and I think we've discussed already that those would go on next week's regular agenda. So if there are no objections to that.
Point of order, not
Please.
point of order, just a clarification. I don't think it was expected that they all be grouped for your consideration. So if there's something about any one of these, I think you're able to separate that out and take issue with it. This was really done just for efficiency of presentation. I'm sure the Sheriff's Office would be thrilled if it all did get approved, and perhaps it will, but nobody should think you can't identify something that you have a particular issue with.
That is a good point, and I take it in a similar way that I would take something on the consent agenda that any commissioner could remove that and put it on regular. And I think, and I believe I'm correct on this as far as our procedures go, that if we are to group these together, any commissioner may, of course, separate out one from that grouping for individual consideration. As it's going on regular agenda, that kind of also underscores that. But let's see, I don't know that it makes much difference because we can always just group them together at the next meeting as we go. So just for the purposes of placement, I will just say that those that we just heard will all go on regular agenda. If that, does that kind of cross all the T's?
Perfect.
Very good. It's a long list, but I'll go ahead and give it a shot. 2021, 328, 329, 330, 331, 334, 311, 335, 312, 337, and 338 will all appear on the regular agenda at our next meeting. Does that sound correct? Very good. That brings us to 20. By the way, thank you, Captain. There you are. I didn't keep score, but you can give us the totals on who won.
It's over.
Sorry.
The trophy has been retired.
Okay. That brings us to 2021-336. Mr. Administrator.
Okay, 2021-336 is a request to approve an agreement for medical examiner services with our current provider, Forensic Medical. This is a suggestion and request from the county council, and if there's any further comment, I'll give the floor to him.
Please proceed.
I'm a little offended that you think I've got 3 items. I can make this work. I can go all day.
I guess I didn't take that into account. Motion here, motion there.
Mr. Counselor, keep this image in mind as you go, as you drag it on.
Yes, Judge, yes, Judge. So this is our current medical examiner. We're very happy with the group. And they would like to continue, and I think we would like to have them continue. The Sheriff's Department and the Prosecutor's Department particularly are very happy with them, and they've done very good work for us. This agreement is for a 5-year agreement. Kind of the key is it's $618,000 for the first year, and really one of the keys of this is that it's capped at a 3-year increase with certain parameters, but essentially we believe it'll be capped at a 3% increase annually. So this will give us a fairly cost-effective approach on our medical examiner services for the next 5 years. Like any medical provider at this point, costs are skyrocketing, and I think this does a very good job of keeping those costs down. I can certainly answer any additional questions.
No, you put your finger on one of the main issues of concern. In recent years, our previous medical examiner services were provided, and those fees went through the roof in a very short period of time. The fact that this gives us a reasonable window of time where we can depend upon a stable cost overhead, I think is something that is a very important factor in this. And I have not heard any problems, and as you outlined, both sheriff and prosecutor are satisfied with the services being provided. So with that, are there any other questions or comments, Commissioner Thompson?
I have none, thank you.
No, thank you.
Okay. I think there's probably a regular agenda item. Does that sound reasonable with everybody? That brings us to 2021-339. Mr. Administrator?
Yeah, and if I may, I'll just take over. 339 and 340 should go together. They're both essentially the same document, different versions of the same document. As the commission knows, there is a national opioid litigation that's been pending for some time that is nationwide. It is a massive litigation. There is the state of Missouri has entered into a settlement along with other states, and we have been working, my office has been working with the State Attorney General's office towards ensuring the county's participation and ensuring our rights. It's essentially like a class action. So what you have in front of you would be a participation agreement in the settlement with 2 of the defendants, the 2 primary defendants at this point. We won't know exactly the outcome until all entities nationwide get their settlements in. And we will be within certain parameters of what our recovery will be. It will be paid out over a number of years. You know, this is done at a very low cost to the county because we did not have to hire our own counsel. And I did notice, I don't think he's come back, Mr. Morgan, Jeremiah Morgan, who you may know, with the State Attorney General's office, who lives here in Clay County. He was here earlier. It looked like he had to leave, but he was hoping, I think, to express his gratitude to the commission for considering this as well.
And certainly, yes, Mr. Morgan is someone who's not a stranger to many of us here in the least. It strikes me that this is something, although on a different level, but something comparable to the tobacco settlement some years ago, where monies were
Very similar, yeah.
Yeah, it's not the same, but there are some similarities that I think put us in the right ballpark as far as how we look at this issue. Do we have any kind of an expectation of when we might be seeing something more solid in the way of numbers?
I believe that the deadline is January 2nd or January 3rd for nationwide for the entities to get their forms in that you have in front of you. And once those are all in and calculated, we'll have a much better idea of timing and amounts.
The other thing that occurs to me is these settlement monies, and I don't know if we know yet or not whether those would be funds that would be dedicated for specific uses or not, but certainly that is something that I think, if they are not dedicated legally to a certain use, I think that I would strongly recommend that the commission look upon this money as being used to remedy the problems caused by that, by the scourge of opioid addiction, which we've been struggling with, and to somehow use it to mitigate that. But once we know the numbers, I think it makes it a little more, it's a bit easier for us to get our arms around it and think exactly what is the best course that we take. But certainly, if this were to be put into the general fund, it would be diluted and possibly not put to the use that we might like to see it put to. So with that, are there any further questions, Commissioner Thompson?
No additional questions, but I agree that we use this money, once we know what we're working with, to put forth, to whatever prevention or help, whatever is needed to be. So I think that'd be a great conversation to have.
Treatment or prevention kind of an issue.
Yeah.
Commissioner Commissioner Carpenter.
No questions. I think, this is a lawsuit that we will be the beneficiary of without attempting to take on these companies as a standalone county, so it makes tremendous sense to sign on to the class action here and resolve it.
It seems to me that this would be something that would be appropriate to go on consent, but on the other hand, is this something that would be as well? I mean, am I right in that? The only reason I think in terms of possibly on regular is if you would anticipate any further information, it would be an opportunity to disseminate that in a public manner. Do you have a preference for yourself, Mr. Counselor, knowing the situation more intimately?
The only thing I think would be a possibility, I would say consent. If Mr. Morgan, our meeting next week is at 6 o'clock, he might want to appear. If he does, we could just pull it onto regular and give him an opportunity to address the commission to the extent that he would like to.
I think that makes sense, because I would very much like to hear from the Attorney General's office, and Jeremiah, Mr. Morgan is someone who is certainly going to be able to provide us with a good deal of information. So with that, we will put 2021, 339, and 340 onto consent with the understanding that we may well end up removing it if we have additional information forthcoming. That brings us to 2021-332. Mr. Administrator.
Commissioners, 2021-332 is an appointment of a new member to the Airport Advisory Board, and I will turn the floor back over to the presiding commissioner.
Do we have the applications? I didn't see it in my packet.
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
I do not have the application.
Okay, usually those are kind of with it here, because we're talking about, let me go ahead and just explain it a little bit where we're at on this to the other commissioners. We have two vacancies. The applicant that was responsive and I was able to communicate with is Mr. Mitten. He is, I'm trying to think of his first name. I'm sorry. Todd, of course. He is someone, and again, I will get the resumes to you, but who has a background both in aeronautics and military. He's a pilot, and I believe, if I remember correctly, the two resumes that we've gotten in are very similar. That's why it's hard to tell them apart. They have very similar backgrounds. But he has, I believe he has an aircraft at the airport.
He does.
So he is someone who seems to me to be highly qualified. As per our Constitution, I have consulted with the administrator on the appointment. He agrees that he would be a good addition. One of the issues that Mr. Mitten and I discussed when I talked with him was he is anxious to see us be able to use the airport in a much more productive way. He sees it also as an underutilized asset that we have in this county, and he's very anxious to see us bring it to its full use. So with that, that is the name I would like to put into nomination. There was a second name. I won't divulge that name right now, although I would, when the I would like to see that resume also, or excuse me, that application also disseminated to the other commissioners.
Will do.
But that person I have not been able to have conversation with. Once I have, then I will feel more comfortable bringing that name before the commission. With 2 vacancies, there have been some concerns about the ability of that particular advisory board to make quorum to be able to conduct business. So rather than, my preference would have been to provide both names at the same time. But I think in the interest of making sure that the board, the Aviation Advisory Board, is able to do their function, I think one more member will possibly alleviate some of their concerns about quorum. So as is the custom, and I think it's a good idea in these cases, I would be looking to put 2021-332 on for regular agenda. I think those sort of positions warrant further discussion, particularly since there may be some more information that commissioners might care to have before rendering their decisions. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions before we leave this subject. And like I said, my recommendation would be, of course, regular agenda. Commissioner Thompson.
Yes, thank you. Were there since there's 2 spots that need to be filled, was there only 2 applicants that applied for this?
Correct.
Okay,
So far as I know, I mean, unless more have come in right now.
As we sit here, that answer is correct.
Thank you very much.
Can we get those, the other associate commissioners, can we get those the applications?
Of
and-
course, with my apologies.
Before next week?
Of course.
Thank you. Yeah, that's all I would need.
Very good. Commissioner?
No questions, thanks.
Very well. With that, we will place 2021-332 on next week's regular agenda. That brings us to 2021-346. Mr. Administrator?
And 2021-346 is an appointment of Victor Hurlbert to the Mid-America Regional Council, or MARC, Board of Directors. Another commission action. Floor is yours.
Thank you. Similar issue, obviously. And of course, Auditor Hurlbert is here to answer any questions. We have on the Mid-America Regional Council's Board of Directors, we have 2 seats with 2 alternates. I can't remember. I think it might be Commissioner Thompson is my alternate on that board at the moment. We have another regular seat that we would fill, and then I would at some future point want to put another alternate on there, but we haven't talked about that yet. Again, in consultation with the administrator, I'd like to put this name forward. One of the reasons to have a non-commissioner on there is with 2 of us showing up at the meeting, that triggers all kinds of sunshine issues and other issues that might make it a little bit more difficult to do business. I think Victor has done a great job on doing a lot of the projects that have come forward, and there is overlap with Mark on these projects. So his knowledge of how the county is applying those programs is, I think, one that will be a very valuable one. I think his assistance would be there to really make sure that we have our that we are participating as fully as possible in Mark. I think we need to step up our game when it comes to that, and I think the auditor will be a very solid addition to our team going down there and making sure that we get our due representation and our due part of any programs that are down there. So with that, that is who I would like to put in there. This one, I didn't mention the term on the previous one. This one, we would be looking at a 2-year term that would be up until December of 2023. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. Commissioner Carpenter?
No questions, thank you.
Commissioner Thompson?
No questions, thank you.
And once again, like I said, my recommendation is that this one be placed on our regular agenda so the commissioners have a chance to contemplate and make any further comments. And since the auditor is here every week, certainly he's always available to answer any questions. So with that and our very, very long regular agenda we went through, is there anyone that would like to take on the rather daunting task of making a motion regarding our action on today's regular agenda?
Commissioner, I will make that attempt. So I'm going to list the ones that I have as consent, and then we'll put the rest on regular. I have those as 2021-322, 2021-324, 2021 Ordinance 48, 2021 Ordinance 47, 2021-325, 2021-326, 2021-339, and 2021-340. That's what I have with the remaining items going on regular for the meeting next Wednesday at 6 p.m.
Very well, motion's been made to put the items listed on consent agenda for our next meeting. The residual that we dealt with on our regular agenda today would be placed on the regular agenda. Yeah, that tracks with my notes as well, Commissioner. So motion has been made. Discussion, Commissioner Thompson?
Nope.
Okay. Any discussion from the public? Seeing none, Commissioner Carpenter, you're recognized to close.
Close.
Please call the roll.
Commissioner Carpenter?
Yes.
Commissioner Thompson?
Yes?
Thank you for taking that on. I'm glad I was not the one to have to sort through that all. That brings us to comments on non-agenda items. Are there any members of the public here who would care to comment on any items not on this afternoon's agenda? Seeing none. Are there any office holders who would like to comment on any items not on the agenda this afternoon? Seeing none. Are there any agencies that would care to comment on any items not on today's agenda? Seeing none. Oh my gosh, page 3 of our agenda.
Okay.
County Administrator's comments. Mr. Administrator, do you have anything you would care to share?
I do not, thank you.
Very good. Commissioner comments. Commissioner Thompson, do you have anything that you would like to comment on?
I don't, thank you.
Commissioner Carpenter?
No, thank you.
I don't either, except to say that I certainly appreciate the patience of everyone involved. Today's meeting was a bit longer and a little more of a deep dive, and I think everybody did a great job. That brings us to approval of minutes of previous sessions. We have two. We have November 3, 2021, 2 p.m., and November 10, 2021, 6 p.m. Is there a motion related to either one or both of those items?
I'll make a motion to approve the November 3rd, 2 p.m. minutes and the November 10th, 6 p.m. meeting minutes as printed.
Motion's been made for the approval of the November 3, 2021, 2 p.m. minutes and November 10, 2021, 6 p.m. minutes. Discussion, Commissioner Carpenter?
No, thanks.
Very well. Commissioner Thompson, you're recognized to close.
I close?
Please call the roll.
Commissioner Thompson?
Yes?
Commissioner Carpenter?
Yes.
That brings us to written reports. County Clerk, would you have anything for us to look at?
Yes, we have two reports. I think they're sitting in front of you right now. One of them is the monthly report for November revenue and fees from the county clerk's office. And the second one is the monthly report for November, auditor's cash basis from the county auditor, and that's it.
Very good, and all members have their reports, I see. Thank you very much. That brings us to executive sessions. There are no executive sessions listed for today's meeting, and that brings us to recess and adjournment. We are adjourned. Thank you very much.
Well, I thought